that's my question: is how do we change that when they're already so embedded in the powerful institutions? When we have quangos that are deciding which adverts are good for us to see, and all that sort of stuff. It's so commonplace.
Yes.
And we don't have people in Parliament who are willing to stand up and make an anti-woke argument.
The problem is that it's a cost-benefit analysis, isn't it? I mean, you're right. There are very good reasons to be positive. One, by the way, is simple. The title of your book, woke. A few years ago, woke was used as a term of approbation. Let me correct myself. A few years ago, when it started to sidle in, there were people, quite a lot of people, who would like to be thought of as woke.
Oh, yeah.
The term was positive.
Yes.
And then at some point, not unconnected with your own fury of a creation running straight at the general public, like an avenging angel, people didn't want to be thought of as woke. It took on other connotations. There was a pejorative to it. And I think that in itself is a positive, because it shows that these things can be turned around against people, that maybe you don't want to be seen as that.
Well, my
today.
favourite was Afua Hirsch in The Guardian, who wrote an article saying that the word woke is just a word that right-wingers use to describe, to denigrate social justice. And I replied to that tweet with a number of screenshots from The Guardian where woke was in the headline.
Yes.
How to find Mr. Woke.
Yeah,
and it's like,
yeah.
so well, maybe The Guardian is right-wing. I
No,
don't know.
they create...
maybe.
They create something and then pretend it's a figment of your imagination.
Yeah, that's it. And they're always going on about gaslighting, but they seem to do it more than anyone.
The number of terms now being thrown out, gaslighting, anyhow. There are reasons to be positive about it. I just come back to this thing. If you're not in the fortunate position of being an independent-minded and, roughly speaking, self-employed person, there's a lot more pain to keep going through. But I come back to this thing. Why, because you mentioned the politicians, why is it so hard for a politician to withstand this? And I think there are reasons that are reasonable, as it were. I mean, one is none of them want to be caught on the wrong side, as many of them were on, for instance, gay issues in the past. They feel, again, this might be, trans may well be simply caught up in the overcorrection about gay. I think that's what's happening. But nobody wants to be caught on the wrong side of what might turn out to be, the wrong side of history. And so they, but here's another thing, that there's simply a cost-benefit analysis, and I've had to spend quite a lot of my life with politicians of all different persuasions, and rowing with them and falling out with them and occasionally agreeing with them. But one thing I have noticed that I've always underestimated is the extent to which in politics a cost-benefit analysis goes on far more than I ever recognized. I could never understand why there were certain things that politicians wouldn't say. And it always comes down to the fact that there's very little to gain for it and a disproportionate amount to potentially lose. So that they simply weigh it up. And every time there's a crowd stampede on one of these issues, they weigh up, I could say something everyone knew till yesterday. I could say it today and my career could be over tomorrow. Should I do it? The contrary position is, we all know we used to believe that yesterday. We all know most people don't believe that today, but we are being bullied today into saying it. And so in order to survive till tomorrow, I'll join in.
I get that. I mean, to give an example, I think most of us know that if we want to live in a free society, the price we pay for that is some people say bad things, say offensive things. But what would a politician have to gain to stand up in Parliament and say, we need to repeal our hate speech laws? Because, of course, the inevitable assault on that will be, you are therefore siding with the racists who want to say the horrible thing.
It wouldn't even be that. It would be, you must be a racist. But you must be trying to do racism again.
But on principle, given that we live in a country where 3,000 people are arrested every year for things they've said online that are deemed to be offensive, then this is something we should be addressing, surely.
Do you know...
So I was not aware of that statistics. 3,000 people a year, 3,000 plus people a year for anti-hate speech laws. or I'm sorry, hate speech laws, that are, and just amazing. That's just amazing. Thank God so far on this side of the pond, folks, we don't have that yet. But I don't even know how those things, what Douglas was talking about, politicians, he, they go to their governmental housing and how they just start drinking the water over there, something changes. They morph into something that they previously weren't. And the calculation, the cost benefit analysis, is sort of like you hear when car companies and airline agencies, they actually have people that do this, folks. They have, bean counters. The car industry was notorious for this. They would basically take a look and say if there was a defective part that might cause an accident, and the internal people, the uppity ups, the executives, were told of a situation that could cause a major problem, a recall, they basically would do the cost benefit analysis. How much would we have to pay out in terms of damages if we got a class action lawsuit against us versus recalling, X amount of cars, hundreds of thousands of cars to retrofit and fix the problem? What do? Politicians, it's obviously not that, I guess you could say, what the severity, but to squelch free speech and label it under the guise of, hate speech laws. But politicians, cost benefit analysis, absolutely. If I speak up, no comment, that's better than a comment, because a comment's going to put me on one side of the situation. At least a no comment, I might be able to, weather that storm for a while till we decide, which direction we're going to, put our finger in our mouth and put up to the wind and see which direction we're going to go. Are we going to go with the blow or are we going to go against the blow? Anyways, folks, let's get back to more of the debate between Douglas Murray and Andrew Doyle. And that's what we have on tap for you today on the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I try to give you my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when you get people like Douglas Murray and Andrew Doyle talking about hate speech laws, politicians, social media, culture, religion, politics, government. They all come crashing together. Let's get back to their talk right now.
I don't think this country minds about free speech all that much. I don't think it's...
I hope you're wrong.
I'm just saying, I just don't think it does. I think we sort of pretend we do, and a small bunch of weirdos of us do. But
I'm one of them.
By and large, yeah, you and me both. But outside that weirdos brigade, the recent history suggests people are quite happy to be quiescent and would rather have a quiet life than stand up for this kind of principle. I come back to this thing. I'm forever comparing this country negatively to France in these regards. But when the Me Too thing started, and everyone knew that at the beginning these are some serious allegations that were being made and criminal charges to be brought, and a correction was needed. But when, as you could see quite early on, the whole thing started to overreach, and you got cases like the Ansari case in America, where comedians basically had a very unfortunate date, but it doesn't mean he should never be allowed to leave the house again. When these things happen, in Britain, basically, people did keep their heads down. We had nothing like the 100 prominent French women from all walks of life, including various friends of mine, among others. And there were people like Catherine Deneuve, very prominent actresses and philosophers and thinkers in France. 100 French female intellectuals and cultural figures sign a letter saying, no, the sexes need to get on. We cannot criminalize flirting. This has gone too far. You couldn't find 100 women in this country to do that. I'm sorry, you couldn't. Not of that level of prominence. Everyone in this country keeps their heads down on these things. It's been my experience throughout my life. It's been the experience of this country in each of the major free speech wars in recent years that, generally speaking, we continue to pretend that the people who are pointing to the issues if they just went quiet and went away, we could all have our comfortable, quiet life again.
Can I give an example of something that might counter that bit?
Please.
Just so that, and this I think points to something, I think there has been a kind of cultural shift. If we go back to the Blair era, if we go back to New Labour, in 2005 they tried to introduce the Religious Discrimination Act. And what that would have meant was that if a comedian made a joke about a religion or mocked anyone's religion, then they would have been liable to prosecution. Now that didn't pass, but by a very small minority.
One vote, because Tony Blair himself didn't turn up.
Always a good thing.
And we had the might of Rowan Atkinson on our side.
So this was my point. So we had basically a concerted effort amongst prominent comedians, spearheaded by Rowan Atkinson, to say, no, this is too much. This is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. This is not something we should be getting behind. Fast forward to our time, and you have the Count Dankula case, the Nazi pug case, where someone makes an obvious joke in a video and he's prosecuted, and that goes to court, 2-year trial, found guilty. Comedians, totally silent. Now, what I'm saying is I think something has changed in that intervening time period.
Well, this is why the target selection on this is so damn clever. The problem is that most people don't have time in the day to work out if the Glaswegian YouTube shitposter is a Nazi or not.
Right.
My presumption in most cases is not to assume everyone is a Nazi until they prove otherwise, but we do live in a culture which takes the contrary point of view on that. Assume Nazism on everyone's behalf until they prove absolute ideological cleanliness. And we don't know quite how you do it, but how does the Count Dankula guy get out of it? He appears to be trying to bring back Nazism through the means of his girlfriend's dog, which is weird.
Well, particularly since the Gestapo arrested a man during the war for teaching their dog to do a Nazi salute. So, but even the Gestapo let that go. But the Scottish judiciary, they took it all the way, you know.
They took it all the way.
I mean that's a very funny one, because the Cybercrime Intelligence Unit investigated him for 2 years, read all his emails, all his texts. They found no evidence whatsoever of far-right leanings, but because the Guardian's got a hunch, you know, we just assume.
Well, but this is a serious problem built into this, because the few weirdos among us, most of whom will be here over the course of this weekend, will stand up for the Nazi pug-themed Glaswegian shitposter guy on the principle, and because then you have to look into a bit. But assuming that most people don't have the time or the energy to do that, they just think, I don't know that I want to do it, because otherwise, if he does turn out to be a Nazi, which again, I don't think he does, but if he does, then you're stuck with Nazi pug dog salute guy. And then, well, what was the point of that?
It makes it seem so frivolous, doesn't it? All this stuff is about such silly things, but actually the principle is so serious. It isn't about a dog and the salute. It's about what it represents, you know?
And the problem I have, and I've discussed this a little bit recently, is how could we... See,
you know, so Douglas, what he said there can be summed up basic, is that we have something here in the United States and probably around all Western democracy, innocent until proven guilty. That's, according to the law, that's what's supposed to be done. That's what we try to shoot for. That's the highest level. Innocent until proven guilty. But that's not what happens in the sphere of public opinion. Oh no. It depends on what side of the ideological coin you're on. If you're on the left, if you're a liberal, socialist, Marxist, if you're part of the Democratic coalition, if you're part of the woke media mob, if you're part of academia, college institutions, if you're professors, teachers, if you're on the right side of the political fence, right? If you're all of that, if you're on the virtue signaling side, if you're part of the elite, then that pertains to you, innocent until proven guilty. But you happen to be on the other side. You're Republican, you're conservative, you're diversity of thought, diversity of opinion. Then it flips around. And you're now guilty by association, and you've got to prove your innocence. And even if you prove your innocence, no, you didn't prove your innocence. You're still guilty. And the alphabet networks and the mainstream media will continue to hound you, continue to show those stories, continue to dig up information that is and just change the narrative, completely lie about things. Say it enough times, people will start to believe it. And as Douglas was saying, that if that's happening in England, but I think it's also the way people are brought up. I mean, the English people are brought up to be prim, proper, don't go against the establishment. I mean, they sort of know what they're doing. That's not right to raise your voice and, to just go about your daily business. Don't get involved in all those other things, so it'll all work out. And even if it doesn't, it's not going to affect me that much. Stay away. I guess that's the thought with most of the British public, except, as he said, those few that, stand up to this ground. Thank God for people like Andrew Doyle and Douglas Murray and others, in England. And then obviously we have tons of those conservatives, fighting against these type of draconian, systemic, types of narratives and rhetoric that's coming, from the left. And we've got those on our side here. They're constantly fighting those battles. And President Trump, with the political correctness, talk about a warrior against that. You got to bring in Donald Trump. I mean, he was fighting that front every single day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow. You all know what to do. Check out our videos above and below. Share your comments. Like to know what side of the speech coin do you fall on? Should there be some limitations on speech? Or is free speech absolute? Let us know. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.